The farmhouse had stood abandoned for nearly 20 years before Emily Harris decided to move in. To her, it wasn't a haunted ruin, it was a chance at peace. After a messy divorce and years of sleepless nights in the city, she wanted nothing more than silence. The realtor warned her about strange noises that came and went with the wind, but Emily dismissed them as the usual creaks of an aging structure. On her first night, she unpacked her essentials, a single suitcase, a kettle, and an old reading lamp, before settling on the creaky couch, telling herself that the emptiness of the house was comforting. The first whisper came at 3:12 a.m. It wasn't loud, not even distinct, just a soft murmur that seemed to rise through the floorboards beneath her couch. Emily sat up, clutching her blanket, her heart pounding hard enough that she could hear it in her ears. She told herself it must be the house settling, or maybe an animal nesting beneath the floor. But as she leaned closer, the murmur came again, faint words she couldn't quite understand, spoken in a rhythmic tone, almost like a lullaby sung from deep underground. The clock on the wall had stopped ticking the next morning. Sunlight revealed details she hadn't noticed the night before. There were scratches near the base of the living room wall, thin, parallel lines that stretched toward the center of the floor. Following them, she found what looked like an old trapdoor hidden beneath a rug. The metal latch was rusted shut, and the boards around it looked newly disturbed, as if someone, or something, had tried to pry it open recently. She felt an odd compulsion to uncover it, to see what lay beneath, but something in her gut told her to wait. She decided instead to busy herself fixing the leaky pipes in the kitchen, ignoring how the air around the trapdoor seemed colder than the rest of the house. Later that afternoon, a man in his 60s came by, introducing himself as George, the nearest neighbor, though near was a relative term in the middle of the countryside. He seemed polite enough, but when Emily mentioned the trapdoor, his expression turned grim. "Don't open that," he said sharply, his voice dropping to a whisper. "They sealed it for a reason. Back when the Millers lived here, they heard voices too. After the boy disappeared, the sheriff nailed it shut." Emily laughed nervously, unsure if he was joking. George didn't laugh. Before leaving, he handed her a small tin of salt and said, "Keep this by your bed, just in case." That night, the whispering returned, clearer this time. Emily sat frozen on her couch as the voice drifted up from the trapdoor, forming syllables that made her skin crawl. "Let me out." The words were childlike, trembling with sadness more than menace. Against every instinct, Emily reached for the rug and pulled it back. The trapdoor's latch trembled as if someone below was trying to lift it. She scrambled for the salt tin, scattering a handful across the floor. Instantly, the whispering stopped. The air went still, heavy, silent. When she looked again, the trapdoor was motionless, but a faint knocking echoed from beneath it, soft and patient, as though whoever was down there knew she would eventually give in. The morning after the dream, Megan woke with the uneasy sensation that her room was smaller than it had been before, the walls just a fraction closer. Her porthole window, usually streaked with spray, was perfectly clean, so clean it reflected her face like a mirror. When she looked into it, for the briefest second, she thought she saw someone standing directly behind her. She spun around, but the cabin was empty. Her unease grew heavier by the hour. She couldn't shake the man's words from the previous day. "You're in my cabin." Determined to learn the truth, she sought out Helen in the library. The older woman's knitting needles clicked rapidly as Megan asked if she knew anything about cabin 743. Helen hesitated before lowering her voice. "There are stories," she said. "A man died in that room. Some say he jumped from the deck. Others say he never left at all." Megan pressed her for details, but Helen only shook her head. "The crew won't talk about it. Not officially. They scrub the passenger lists every year, but sometimes things slip through." She slid a folded piece of paper across the table. "I kept this from a cruise years ago. Same ship. Look at the names." When Megan unfolded the paper, her stomach tightened. It was a photocopy of an old passenger list, dated exactly 3 years prior. Most of the names were blurred from the copy, but one stood out in sharp, bold print. Daniel Crow, cabin 743. In the column marked disembarked, his entry was blank. Megan ran her finger down the list twice, hoping she'd missed it, but there was no departure record. When she looked up, Helen's eyes were glassy. "He never checked out," Helen whispered. And neither did the girl who had that room before you. That night, as the ship rocked gently on the dark water, an announcement blared over the intercom, the kind that instantly quieted every conversation on board. Attention all passengers. If anyone has seen Ms. Laura Bennett, please contact guest services immediately. Murmurs swept through the hallways. Megan didn't know the name, but her chest tightened anyway. Later, she overheard two crew members whispering near the stairwell. She was last seen near the aft deck, one said. Security says the cameras glitched again. The other just muttered, "It's happening again." Before walking off quickly, in the early hours of the morning, Megan awoke to the sensation of the mattress shifting, as if someone had just sat down beside her. She kept her eyes closed, paralyzed, every muscle rigid. A moment later, a cold fingertip brushed her wrist, and a man's voice whispered near her ear, "You need to leave." Emily woke to sunlight streaming through her curtains, but the image of the small hand placing the photo beside her bed refused to leave her mind. The photo now sat on her dresser, the dark smudge along its edge dried to a rust-brown crust. She had locked her bedroom door that night, though the lock itself looked as though it hadn't been turned in decades. Every time she blinked, she saw the boy's pale fingers retreating into the dark. She needed answers. Whatever haunted this place wasn't going to vanish on its own, and neither, it seemed, was she. The backyard stretched into a fog-shrouded field that morning. George's words echoed in her mind as she stepped outside. They said he fell into the old well behind your house. She had seen the structure from afar before, a round mound of stone half hidden by tall grass. But up close, it felt alive, as if the air around it thrummed with something unseen. The wooden lid covering the mouth of the well was rotted and split down the middle. The metal chain once used to lower the bucket had rusted into a stiff coil. Emily's flashlight beam quivered across the dark gap between the boards. She swore she saw something move inside. By midday, she had gathered enough courage to pry one of the boards aside. The smell hit her first, wet earth and something sharp, metallic. When she shone the flashlight down, the beam cut through a column of mist before hitting something that gleamed faintly below the surface. It wasn't water. It was glass. Dozens of small, shattered jars littered the bottom, their fragments catching the light like fish scales. Something was written on them in what looked like chalk or dried paint. Names, each barely legible, smeared and fading. Emily's breath hitched. One of them clearly read Eli Miller. She stumbled back, dropping the flashlight, which rolled toward the well and stopped at the edge. Panic surged through her, the kind that made her chest tighten and her vision blur. She turned to run, but her foot caught on something buried in the grass. When she looked down, she realized it was a small shoe, child-sized and worn nearly to threads. Her stomach turned as she noticed how fresh the dirt around it looked, as if it had been unearthed recently. The wind shifted, carrying a faint sound, not quite words, but a whisper rising from the open well. "Don't leave me again." That night, Emily sat by her kitchen window, the photo of Eli clutched tightly in her hand. The well was visible from where she sat, just a dark silhouette against the field. Each gust of wind seemed to carry the echo of that voice, soft and pleading. She thought about George, about the sealed trapdoor, about the jars with names at the bottom of that well. Whoever, or whatever, Eli had become, it wasn't resting. As the clock ticked toward midnight, she made a decision she didn't fully understand. Tomorrow, she would open the trapdoor. She had to see what connected the whispers beneath the floor to the secrets buried in the well. The wind howled outside that night, scraping dead leaves across the windows, but inside, the house was unnervingly still. Emily sat on the couch, staring at the floor where the rug had been rolled back. The trapdoor seemed to pulse in the flickering lamplight, as though it were alive. She could hear faint movement below, something slow and steady, almost like breathing. The photo of Eli lay on the table beside her, the boy's faded smile catching the light. "You want to be remembered," she whispered. "Then show me." Her voice trembled, but her resolve had hardened into something that felt dangerously close to obsession. When she wedged the crowbar beneath the latch, the wood resisted at first, creaking as if it were protesting. Then, with a sharp crack, the rusted metal gave way. A gust of cold air rose up from below, smelling of soil, rot, and something old enough to have forgotten sunlight. Emily gagged and dropped the crowbar, her flashlight clattering against the boards. When she retrieved it and shone it downward, the beam revealed a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Wooden steps warped with age, damp and slick. A whisper curled through the air. "You came back." Each step moaned under her weight as she descended. The temperature dropped with every breath. The walls, made of rough stone, were covered in what looked like soot or mold. Halfway down, she noticed carvings, crude marks etched into the rock. Names again, not just Eli's, but others she didn't recognize. Martha, Jonah, Ruth, Daniel. Each name had been crossed out, except one that stood clear and unblemished: Emily. Her hand froze midair as she traced the letters, the chill from the stone seeping into her skin. "No," she whispered, her breath trembling. "That's not possible." At the bottom of the stairs, the beam of her flashlight caught on something pale in the corner. A small figure crouched against the wall. It was the boy from the photograph, or what was left of him. His eyes glowed faintly in the dark, reflecting the light in unnatural hues. His skin was gray and thin, stretched too tight over bone, and his mouth quivered as he spoke. "You look like her," he said softly. "The one who left me here." Emily took a step closer, her flashlight trembling in her hand. "Who?" she whispered. The boy tilted his head, his expression both sad and accusing. "My mother." Emily's knees nearly gave out. The air felt thick and electric, pressing against her chest. She tried to speak, but the boy raised a trembling hand. "She sealed me here," he said, tears cutting pale tracks through the dirt on his face. She said the voices would stop, but they didn't. They just changed. He looked up at her with those hollow eyes. "You opened the door again." The walls began to vibrate softly, the carvings shifting like they were alive. From the cracks in the stone, whispers poured out, hundreds of them, overlapping, calling her name. Emily stumbled backward toward the stairs, but the door above slammed shut, trapping her in the dark. The sound of whispers swelled until Emily could no longer tell where they came from. They weren't just in the air, they were in the walls, the floor, even inside her head. Dozens of voices murmured her name in a low, mournful chorus. Some wept, others laughed. A few hissed words she couldn't understand. She pressed her hands over her ears, screaming for them to stop, but the sound only grew louder. It was the kind of noise that made her bones ache, as if the house itself were alive and breathing her in. And beneath it all, she heard the boy's small, steady voice. She promised she'd come back. When the whispers finally ebbed, Emily found herself standing before the boy again. His eyes reflected the lantern light like a cat's, and his mouth curved into something between a smile and a grimace. "They're hungry," he said softly, "but they remember you." Emily shook her head. "You're not real. You're—" But she stopped when the boy raised his hand and pointed toward the far wall. There, scrawled in a darker pigment, was another carving, a family tree of sorts, crudely etched into the stone. Her own last name was at the very bottom, Harris. Beneath it, a faint line led upward to another name, Clara Miller. The revelation hit her like a cold slap. "Clara," she whispered, remembering something George had said, that the Millers had lived here before the disappearance, that the mother had been blamed but never found. Emily stared at the wall, at the crude link connecting her to the name above. The boy's face softened. "You left me here," he said again, his voice trembling now. "But you came back." His small hand reached out toward her, but she stumbled back into the opposite wall, her flashlight flickering wildly. The stone beneath her palm felt warm, almost like flesh, and when she looked down, she saw that the carvings were bleeding. The ground trembled beneath her feet. Dust fell from the ceiling, and the whispers began to change, no longer sad, but angry. "You opened the door, she opened the door," they chanted. Emily turned toward the stairs, but the steps had vanished, replaced by shifting stone that seemed to melt into itself. The boy stood perfectly still now, his eyes darkening, his mouth opening wider than it should have been. "It's too late," he whispered. "Once you hear them, they never let you go." He tilted his head toward the ceiling. "You shouldn't have come back here, Clara." The name struck her like a thunderclap. Not Emily, but Clara. Her mind reeled. For a moment, her own memories felt foreign. The divorce, the move, the decision to buy the house. They unraveled, like someone else's story forced into her mind. The house groaned again, and the boy began to fade into the darkness. his form flickering like smoke. "You'll remember soon," his voice echoed faintly. "Then you'll see what she did." The last of the light flickered out, leaving her in complete darkness. But even with her eyes closed, she could still see faint outlines moving across the walls, hands reaching, faces emerging, and every one of them whispering her name. The darkness swallowed everything. Emily's, no, Clara's, breath came in shallow bursts as the sound of the whispers dulled to a steady hum, like the echo of an old lullaby. The name Clara rang in her skull, scraping at the edges of her memory. She pressed her palms against her temples, gasping. "I'm not her," she said aloud, her voice shaking. "I'm Emily Harris." But when she said it, it felt hollow, like a story she'd been told to believe. The boy's voice echoed faintly from the dark. "You were her. You left me." Her flashlight flickered weakly back to life, its beams slicing through the black. It landed on the far wall where the carvings bled just moments before. The blood was gone now, replaced by a patch of loosened stone. The surface looked strange, uneven, as though something had been walled up inside. The air there pulsed faintly, warmer than the rest of the cellar. Against her better judgment, Clara lifted a piece of debris and struck the wall. Once, twice. On the third hit, the stone gave way with a hollow crack. Dust poured out, followed by the faint smell of old earth and decay. Behind the wall was a small, sealed chamber, no larger than a closet. Inside lay several boxes, wrapped in rotting burlap and tied with disintegrating rope. Clara hesitated, her hands trembling, before untying one. The lid fell open to reveal a collection of children's toys, wooden blocks, a small doll with one missing eye, a rusted tin car. Beneath them lay something else, a bundle of letters tied with faded red ribbon. Her heart pounded as she opened the first one. The handwriting was hers. The letters were addressed to Eli. The words, though smudged, were unmistakable. Apologies, pleas for forgiveness, promises to quiet the voices. One line stood out more than the rest. "I can't let them take you too. I'll keep you safe beneath the floor, where they can't find you." Clara's hands shook violently. Her mind reeled with flashes that weren't quite memories. Her own reflection in a cracked mirror, a boy crying in the corner, the sound of nails hammering wood. She dropped the letter and stumbled backward, her chest heaving. The realization hit her like a storm. She hadn't just found the boy. She had trapped him. The voices surged again, rising from the walls, the floor, even the air. They weren't angry now. They were desperate. "You promised," they cried. "You said you'd keep us safe." The boy appeared once more, his face shifting between sorrow and rage. "You did this," he whispered, stepping closer. "You buried us here. You tried to forget." Clara fell to her knees, sobbing. "I didn't know. I didn't remember." The boy knelt beside her, his hand brushing the photo that had fallen from her pocket. "Now you do," he said softly. The light from her flashlight flickered, and the walls began to move, slow, grinding, as if the house itself were coming alive. The names carved into the stone glowed faintly, illuminating the entire chamber. Clara stared, realizing there were dozens more she hadn't seen before. Children. All of them. "What did I do?" she whispered. But the answer came not in words, in sound. The cellar filled with the echo of pounding fists, small voices calling for help, the soft, haunting melody of the same lullaby she remembered from the fragments of her past. The boy turned toward her, his face serene now, almost human. "You can't undo what's buried," he said. "But you can finish it." Before Clara could speak, the candle beside her extinguished, and the cellar fell silent once more. The silence after the porch light died was unbearable. Amelia stood in the middle of the living room, every lamp burning behind her, as though light alone could hold back what lingered outside. She waited for the knock to return, but instead came a new sound, slow pressure against the door, the groan of wood bending under weight. The doorknob rattled once, a violent twist, and then again, harder. Someone was trying to come inside. Amelia staggered backward, eyes locked on the door, throat tight with terror. The old farmhouse was sturdy, built in another era, but the lock had always felt fragile. With each shudder of the door, Amelia imagined the deadbolt snapping like brittle bone. She wanted to scream, to shout into the night that whoever it was had chosen the wrong house, but her voice refused to rise. Instead, she fled to the kitchen, heart racing, searching for something. anything that might protect her. Her hands fumbled across drawers, pulling out knives, but they looked absurdly small in her shaking grip, like toys against whatever waited outside. The pounding began. Not the polite rhythm of knocking anymore, but heavy blows that made the wood tremble in its frame. The pictures on the wall rattled, one crashing to the floor and shattering glass across the boards. Amelia pressed herself against the far wall, covering her ears, tears spilling freely now. She wanted to run upstairs, to barricade herself in her room, but something about turning her back on the door felt even more dangerous. She forced herself to look, to see if the lock with the door bulged inward with each strike. Shadows spilled through the narrow cracks around the frame, stretching across the floor like grasping hands. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the pounding stopped. The silence returned, thicker and more suffocating than before. Amelia's breaths came ragged, shallow, her chest burning with the weight of holding herself still. She thought it might finally be over, that perhaps the thing had given up. But then, from the other side of the door, came a sound that made her blood run cold. Slow, deliberate breathing that it was deep, uneven, as though the lungs drawing it in had not breathed for centuries. Each exhale scraped the wood, vibrating through the air, so close Amelia felt the heat of it through the cracks. She stared, frozen, as the breathing grew louder, angrier, until it suddenly cut off mid-inhale. Silence again. Amelia's knees weakened, and she sank against the wall. She didn't dare approach the door, not now. She only knew one thing for certain. Whatever was outside had decided it would not be knocking anymore. The descent felt longer this time. The air was heavier, thicker, as though every breath was being borrowed from something else. The stairs groaned beneath Clara's weight, and her lantern dimmed, the flame barely clinging to life. She could feel the heartbeat of the house now, slow and deep, pulsing through the air. Each beat rattled her bones. As her foot touched the cellar floor again, she froze. The ground was no longer hard stone. It was soft, yielding, like damp soil. The roots she had glimpsed before crawled across it, twitching faintly as though reacting to her presence. The boy waited for her, standing where the wall had broken open. His expression was calm, almost expectant. "You came back," he said softly. His voice carried a note of relief, but underneath it was something darker, resignation. "You said you would." Clara clutched the lantern tighter. "I came to make it right," she whispered. "To let you go." The boy shook his head slowly. "You can't let go what you've bound," he said. "Not until it's fed." His eyes shifted past her toward the stairs, and she realized the trapdoor above had vanished again, swallowed by darkness. There would be no going back. The roots writhed, moving closer, curling around her boots. She stumbled backward, but the boy didn't move. His eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the lantern light. "They weren't supposed to die," she said, voice breaking. "I was trying to protect you from them." He tilted his head, a small, sorrowful smile on his lips. "But you protected me from everyone, even from the ones who could have saved us." The walls pulsed harder now, the sound like a heartbeat quickening in panic. From the cracks, whispers poured out again, dozens of voices, layered and echoing, chanting fragments of her name. Then, the mass of roots in the back of the chamber began to move. It shifted and unfurled, revealing a faint shape beneath, skeletal, tangled in wood and rot. The outline was unmistakable, the curled remains of a child. Clara's knees buckled, the lantern nearly slipping from her grasp. "No," she whispered, her throat tight. "No, no, no." The boy's voice trembled now. "You left me here," he said again, but softer this time, almost forgiving. "But the house, it kept me. It grew from me." The roots pulsed again, their tips glowing faintly red like embers. "It remembers what you buried. All of us." The voices grew louder, the air vibrating with them. The lantern's flame flared suddenly bright, illuminating the entire chamber. The walls, the carvings, the countless faces half-formed in the stone. All around her, the roots stretched toward the light, twisting violently as if trying to escape it. Clara fell to her knees beside the small remains and reached out, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'll set you free." But as her fingers brushed the roots, pain shot through her body. The roots latched on, curling around her wrist, searing her skin. The boy stepped back, his form dissolving into shadow. "You can't free what you've become," he said. "You can only feed it." The cellar trembled. Cracks split through the walls, dust falling like ash from the ceiling. The roots surged, pulling her down toward the earth. The lantern toppled, its flames spilling across the floor, setting the roots ablaze. Fire roared to life, the heat blinding. Clara screamed as the air filled with smoke and the house itself groaned in pain, its timbers splitting, its walls wailing. As she was pulled into the burning dark, the boy's voice echoed one last time through the roar of flame. "Now the house will remember you, too." The fire had devoured everything. When Clara awoke, she was lying in the grass several yards from the ruins, her lungs aching from smoke and her hands blistered raw. The farmhouse was gone, swallowed whole by flame, leaving only the stone foundation and a skeleton of charred beams behind. The air still reeked of burning wood and something older, sour and sweet like decay. She sat up slowly, her mind fogged. The night before fractured into broken images, the roots writhing, the child's remains, the boy's fading voice. She remembered the heat, the scream, and then nothing. As the day wore on, the world seemed eerily calm. No birds called from the trees, no insects stirred in the grass. Clara wandered through the ruin, every step crunching over ashes and broken glass. Where the trapdoor had once been was now a blackened crater, its edges cracked and still smoldering. She peered down, but there was nothing beneath. No cellar, no stairs, no trace of the labyrinth that had lived below. The house had burned itself hollow. But the silence felt wrong. It wasn't peace. It was waiting. By evening, she found herself drawn to the well. It stood untouched, as if the fire had avoided it deliberately. The stones were cold beneath her fingertips, slick with dew. Peering over the edge, she saw only darkness, endless, suffocating black. And yet, as she stared deeper, she thought she saw movement. Something shifting far below, like ripples across deep water. A faint whisper rose up, so soft it might have been wind. "You remembered." Her breath caught in her throat. The voice was the boy's, but it wasn't sad anymore. It was tired, ancient. The ground beneath her feet felt different, unsteady. The charred remains of the farmhouse groaned faintly as the wind picked up, carrying with it the smell of damp earth. Clara took a step back, but the whisper rose again, stronger now. "You can't burn what's beneath." Her heart pounded. "What do you want from me?" she shouted into the well. For a moment, there was only silence, then a soft, almost human laugh. "You." The word echoed through the hollow space and into her bones. The dirt around the well shifted, cracking as if something beneath it were breathing. Clara stumbled backward, watching in horror as thin roots began to push up through the soil once more. They were smaller now, fragile and blackened from fire, but still alive. They spread outward in every direction, curling toward the ruins like veins reconnecting to a heart. A memory surfaced in her mind, her own voice, whispering to Eli years ago, "No one will hurt you again. I'll keep you safe here, forever." Tears burned down her face as realization sank in. The fire hadn't freed him. It hadn't freed any of them. It had only fed the thing beneath, binding her to it once more. As night fell, the last embers of the farmhouse died, leaving only the sound of the wind and the faint whisper of something moving deep underground. Clara sat in the dirt until the stars blurred above her, her body trembling from exhaustion and fear. She didn't know if she was alive or something less than that now, only that the house was gone, and yet still here. Its memory lingered in the soil, in the roots, in her. And in the faint reflection of the well's dark water, a child's face smiled back at her, whispering softly, "Home." Rain came with dawn, soft at first, then pounding. It washed the ashes into the soil, blurring the lines between what was earth and what had once been home. Clara stood in the ruins, her clothes soaked, her skin cold as stone. The house had vanished completely, leaving behind only the crater where the cellar used to be and the well. Ancient, unbroken, impossibly deep. She should have left, she thought. Walked until her feet bled and the world forgot her name. But she couldn't. Something in the air called to her, quiet but relentless. The house wasn't done with her. She felt it in the rhythm of the rain, the same heartbeat that had pulsed through the walls that night. It thudded beneath her boots, in the soil itself. Every drop that fell seemed to hum faintly, vibrating in her bones. She dropped to her knees, pressing a trembling hand into the mud. The roots had returned, small and blackened, but still moving, threading through the earth like worms. They curled around her fingers, clinging. The ground beneath her shuddered once, like something stirring in its sleep. Clara looked toward the well. The water glowed faintly red in the stormlight. She rose slowly, walking toward it as thunder cracked overhead. The rain should have filled the well to overflowing, but it hadn't. The water stayed level, as though the ground refused to drown it. She leaned over the edge, staring down. For a moment, she saw only her reflection, pale, gaunt, eyes hollow. Then, ripples distorted it, reshaping her features into something older, colder. Behind the reflection, faces bloomed in the dark water. The boy, the woman she had seen in the visions, others she didn't recognize. Their eyes opened one by one, gazing up at her. A voice rose from the depths, layered, countless. "You built us. Now stay." Clara's breath hitched. "I didn't mean to," she whispered, though the words felt small, meaningless against the storm. "I was trying to save you." Lightning flashed again, and for an instant, she saw shapes moving beneath the water, bodies intertwined with roots, reaching upward. The ground beneath her feet softened, pulling gently at her shoes. The well's edge trembled. She knew, in some quiet part of herself, that she could step back, leave, forget. But the truth was colder and simpler. There was nowhere left to go. The house was gone, but its foundation, her foundation, was still alive, still hungry. And she was part of it. The whisper became a chorus, a low hum rising through the storm. The earth cracked open around the well, exposing a faint glow beneath, the same red light that had burned in the cellar walls. Clara took one last step forward, rain streaking down her face like tears. "I remember now," she said softly. "I built you to keep the darkness out, but it was always in me." Then she leaned forward and let herself fall. The descent was endless. Cold water closed around her, but there was no pain, no panic. Only warmth, and the faint thrum of a heartbeat that matched her own. As she sank deeper, the glow surrounded her, pulsing gently, and she felt the roots reach for her, not to bind, but to welcome. The boy's face appeared before her, smiling faintly. "You came home," he said, and the world went still. Above, the rain stopped. The clouds parted, and morning light broke through, soft and golden. The well stood silent again, its surface calm, its glow gone. The field around it lay still, peaceful for the first time in years. And if one stood close enough, they might hear, just barely, the faint sound of a heartbeat beneath the earth, steady and eternal.